Welcome, AP Psychology students. This video is over Module 62 and done in my basement. With this module, we're going to be looking at the stability of intelligence scores over the lifespan. Do we get smarter as we get older? Do we get less intelligent? What's that relationship there? And then look at a few of the traits of those at the low and high intelligence extreme. So very high IQ and very low IQ. So first thing here, looking at, is intelligence more stable or does it change a lot? And so just kind of an overview of the research, you kind of have to look at you start at the earliest ages, studying infants and babies and stuff. And believe it or not, they do have, you could probably argue how valid it is, but they do have some so-called infant intelligence tests. And they rely on this idea of habituation, which I'm not sure if we've talked about this, but basically it's how quickly do you get kind of, I don't know if bored is the right word, but if you hear a loud noise, you might jump to it. And then if you hear it again, you'll have a lessened response to it. So the quicker that habituation took place, they would kind of use that as their operational definition for intelligence, because apparently you're learning quicker than those that have the same response over and over and over. Those tests don't seem to be terribly reliable for predicting adult intelligence. So what we're saying is if you do well on this test, it doesn't mean, okay, you're advanced as an infant. It doesn't necessarily mean you'll be advanced as an adult. What they found is IQ begins to stabilize around the age of 7. And the basic trend is the older you get, the more your IQ stabilizes. So it's much more likely to fluctuate during childhood, but once you get to, young adulthood, it's pretty stable. To be clear here, we're not saying that you can't learn things and get more, knowledgeable. We're just saying your performance on an IQ test, which again, we've talked about how, is that really valid and what are the pros and cons? Your performance on these intelligence tests would pretty much stabilize. So anything below the age of 7, really no predictive validity for later in life. This question of do we lose intelligence as we age? It kind of depends. Like we said, as you go through adulthood, your IQ scores tend to stabilize. And they don't change much the older you get. But there's two different types of research we can use to study intelligence. You can have cross-sectional research, which is basically let's study 20-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 60-year-olds, and 80-year-olds. And when we do that, what we find is that when it comes to novel tasks, novel problem solving, the younger people tend to kick the older people's butt. They tend to do way better on those kinds of tasks. So this was kind of the first research that came out. People were like, oh my gosh, maybe when people turn 60, we should just put them out to pasture. Oh my gosh. But if you look at longitudinal research, meaning you study the same group of people from the time that they're 20 till they're 80, we saw much less of a drop off. So really what's happening here is with cross-sectional, the problem is you're studying different groups of people from different generations. And so up until recently, a lot of the younger generations had better learning environments than the older ones, more, challenging academic opportunities and just, an environment that lends itself to learning more so than older generations, at least when it comes to an intelligence test. So what it all really comes down to are two terms, fluid and crystallized intelligence. These are very important terms. They pretty much always put these on the AP test, so definitely want to know these, but they're not really difficult. So fluid intelligence is your ability to solve abstract problems and learn new information and skills and to do it quickly. So what we find is that younger people tend to do well. If there's something that doesn't rely on prior knowledge, they tend to be able to solve abstract problems much quicker than older people, and their processing speed is just faster. So that's fluid intelligence. Think about if someone gave you a new, problem, or you think about technology, gave you like a new device and like, hey, figure this out, although that would rely a little bit on prior knowledge. But something you've never done before, here's a new task, see if you can figure it out. Younger people tend to do better on that. Crystallized intelligence is using the knowledge you've accumulated over time. So I like to think of this as like wisdom. So older people tend to, not always, but tend to have more wisdom. They've been there, they've done that. They can use what has happened to them and what they've learned from it in the past to solve, the newer problems in front of them. So as you get older, crystallized intelligence tends to go up, even into late adulthood, up until like the point where someone was just like in general cognitive decline near the end of their life. So fluid intelligence, you can see here what that is, and that's going to decrease as you get older. Really, good news, bad news. Right now in your life, you're at your peak for fluid intelligence, so enjoy it. And then that's going to go down, and then crystallized intelligence is going to keep going up. So think about things like vocabulary, like knowing words. Like how many words do you know? Maybe, your grandma doesn't, remember everybody's name, but you play Scrabble and she just, lays waste to everybody because she has a big vocabulary. I think about like the older men in my family who just, they know how to do like work on things around the house, and a lot of it's just because they've been around a long time and they've learned how to do it, and it's just accumulated knowledge over time. So you can see here how that changes. It's important to know that you kind of know the relationship with age as well. This is just a chart showing the general trends with different cognitive abilities. You can see most of these, so like your speed, your memory, reasoning, spatial visualization, those are all going down. So right here at 20, they're pretty high, and then by the time here at 90, I'm not sure of all the numbers, how they came up with those, but you can see that the general trend is a pretty steep drop. However, vocabulary generally goes up. So I'm always wondering about this dip. Why does it go down in your 30s? My hypothesis has always been that's when people like have kids and they're just too busy to read or whatever. I don't know. Don't write that down in your notes. Okay. And then lastly, looking at the extremes of intelligence, the book goes into more depth here. I'm just going to give you kind of the bare bones. But basically the low extreme, it's called intellectual disability. This is what they used to call it the R word. I'm not going to use that word, but now it's been changed to intellectual disability. So the definition there would be having an IQ of below 70. So that's, if you remember your standard deviations and stuff, that's going to be 2 full standard deviations below the mean. That's going to put someone in the bottom 2% of the population. So they need to have an IQ below there and have difficulty adapting to independent living. Like these are people that would have a hard time living by themselves, taking care of themselves. They need some kind of assisted, they need some help in their day-to-day tasks. And then the high extreme, if you want to use the term genius or whatever, this would be considered an IQ of 130 or above. And this would be 2 full standard deviations above the mean, which would put someone in the top 2% of the population worldwide. And just a few things here. I'm not a big fan of Louis Terman, but he did spend a lot of his academic life studying high IQ individuals, and there were some things that were a little bit surprising. There's kind of in pop culture, kind of this idea that really smart people, really high IQ people are like socially awkward or inept. You always think about like Sheldon from Big Bang Theory, how he's, has a hard time, with social, cues and those kind of things. Generally speaking, that's not the case for most people with high IQs. Most people with high IQs are pretty successful socially. They tend to be successful in their careers. So his studies found that these people were generally pretty happy, pretty well adjusted. They mostly had good careers. They weren't necessarily like, you know, Nobel Prize winners or things like that, but these were your doctors, your lawyers, your professors, and not all of them, but like they were in pretty advanced fields, and they were pretty well adjusted and pretty successful, and had you know good careers, and they were pretty happy. And then finally, the reading talks a little bit about this idea of tracking, which would be putting students in a class. It's like if you have the advanced kids, you put them all together with other advanced kids, like a talented and gifted program. And then those who were lower in achievement, they would put them in a class with other lower achieving students. And so, there's a forum post on this in the unit that you can kind of comment on. So it talks about this at the end of the section, so you can kind of read that. But, you could probably argue some positives. Maybe sometimes advanced kids get bored if you're always kind of waiting on the other kids, if the teacher's not able to kind of differentiate the lessons for you. But on the flip side, you think about what it could do to students at the lower end. And if you're being put in a class and you kind of know, like, okay, I'm being put in the low class, that could create what we call like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So this idea of like, well, I've been put in the low class, that must mean I'm not very smart, which leads to I'm not really going to try that much. You kind of have like the learned helplessness. And it feeds into itself. So because I've been told I'm low, I'm going to perform worse, and I'm going to become a lower achieving student. So I'm curious to hear some of your thoughts on that, if you use this one for your open choice forum, if you've got some other opinions on this one. So that is kind of a good place to stop. Hopefully at the end of this, you can create 2 examples of tasks that would require crystallized intelligence, 2 for fluid intelligence, have an opinion on tracking. Think about the overall research of how intelligence changes as we age, for good or for bad, and like what does the research say about the stability of intelligence scores. So that's a good place to stop. Thanks for listening. Bye, guys.